people who smoke 20 cigarettes a day, guess how many years of life they lose?
I think I've heard this maybe it was 7, I think.
8 years, right?
8 years.
So if you smoke 20 cigarettes a day for your adult life, you lose 8 years.
Yeah.
How many years do you think you lose if you drink a bottle of wine a day?
Which is a lot of people drink a bottle of wine a day.
So you lose 7 years.
Right.
But I was shocked by that because 20 cigarettes a day is quite a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
and a bottle a day, if you drink 2, now this is a big point with alcohol, and I think it's important for anyone listening. Alcohol and risk have a J curve. So the more you drink, the risk more than doubles. So it's not a linear relationship. So when you drink 2 bottles of wine a day, you lose 21 years. That's a 3-fold increase for just twice the amount, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So really urging those who drink more, cut down, because you will drastically reduce your life loss.
Hi everybody, welcome back to This is Powerful with me, Paul Scolford. In this podcast, I speak to some incredible people about mindset, mental health, addiction and recovery. And I share my own journey throughout these conversations. So whether you're on your own path of self-discovery, recovery or transformation, inspired by human stories of mental resilience, or supporting someone who is struggling with addiction, make sure you follow and subscribe to This is Powerful. There'll be a new episode every Thursday. In these episodes, we will be talking about drug and alcohol misuse, suicide, sexual abuse, and some other heavy topics. So please take care when listening. Today I have the most amazing, fantastic guest who happens to be my wife. Dr. Federica Amati is Head Nutritionist at Zoe, the science and nutrition company. She is nutrition topic lead at Imperial College, London Faculty of Medicine, and head of nutrition science at medical concierge company Wellfounded Health. Federica is an author of Recipes for Better Menopause and Sunday Times bestseller, Everybody Should Know This. This week is Cancer Prevention Awareness Week. So aside from wanting just to steal a bit of time with my wife, we wanted to talk about the World Cancer Research Fund's campaign focusing on alcohol as a preventable risk factor. Current alcohol guidelines, which is out of date and quite a shock actually. To help make a change, please head over to show notes. There's some really important links. One is to sign a petition to help change government legislation for alcohol awareness. And the other links will take you to the data to show how alcohol can increase the risks of cancer. Welcome, Dr. Federica Amati, to This is Powerful. Thank you for coming on here.
Thank you very much for having me.
I know you're busy. Because you're my wife.
Yeah.
And we live in the same house.
we do, but we don't see each other as much as we'd like, I guess, because we're both
This is quite
busy.
surreal, actually.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here. Yeah.
I'd love to go back to the beginning from where you're from.
Yeah.
And how your upbringing was.
So I'm from Italy. I was born in Rome and worked by 2 very loving parents who loved me and my brother dearly. And we had a sort of a typical childhood for, Italian kids, lots of grandparents around, lots of holidays by the sea, compulsory family meals were not optional until the age of when I left home. Otherwise, we had to have family meals together every weekend
Which I
and
think
every
is
evening.
Culturally a very good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really good to do that. And we lived in Rome till I was about 7, and then we moved to London because my mum got a job here. I've been here for most of my life in the UK, but as you know, I'm still proudly Italian. I still have my Italian passport and I consider myself Italian. And we grew up, even in our house in London, Italian television, spoke Italian everywhere, Italian food. Then spent, rest of my childhood here, went to university in Scotland, Edinburgh, which I loved. My first degree was in biomedical sciences and honours was in pharmacology. So I wanted to do medicine, but on the day of my chemistry A-level exam, my maternal grandmother died and she lived with us. So again, very Italian. When my grandparents got ill, they moved in with us at home here in London. And so I helped but they were part of our family unit. And my mother's mum, she had kidney disease. She was type 2, she had type 2 diabetes. And she died the day of my organic chemistry paper, which is a really big paper for medicine. And I remember that I went to the exam, but I was in bits. I was just crying. And the teacher said, listen, just sit down, write your name, and then don't write anything on the paper. We'll tell the exam board what happened. You'll have what was called at the time a extenuating circumstance. And then what they do is they look at the rest of your work and sort of decide whether you can go ahead or not. So I just sat in the back of the hall. I'd written my name and my UCAS number, which was like the number we all had at the time, and just stared at the wall and didn't do the paper. And I was supposed to go to Imperial College, School of Medicine, had a place. And they said, yeah, don't worry. You've got the grades and everything else. You've passed the interview process, so you can come anyway. And then 2 weeks before I was supposed to start, they said, actually, we've changed our minds. We can't give a place. The medical school there is very prestigious and very competitive. They said, we can't give you a place if you don't have all the A's. So I spoke to our head of sixth form, and she said, well, you've got a really good UCAS form. I'd done years of work experience in hospitals. They were like, just, you can go somewhere else. Why don't you do biomedical sciences? And then you can apply for postgraduate medicine if you still want to do it, which is very similar to the American system. I said, okay, well, where's really good for biomedical sciences? And I can't remember her name now, my teacher, she said, well, Edinburgh University is excellent. It's the best in the country. So I called this woman up in admissions office. I gave her my UCAS number, tap, tap, tap. And she said, yeah, your application's excellent. We'd love to have you. So I came home like maybe 45 minutes after leaving home and said, I'm going to Scotland. I'm going to Edinburgh. My parents, my poor mum, said she had an asthma attack. She had a panic attack.
What, seriously?
Yeah, she did. That evening. It was just, I'd never been there before. I had no idea. But it was the best 4 years. I loved my degree.
Did you know at the time, even though you really enjoyed it and liked it, where that was going to lead to?
No.
Was you going to go into nutrition?
No, I didn't even know nutrition was an option. I didn't even know that was a thing. And nutrition hasn't really been considered a serious science until quite recently. It was always quite a fringe
Which is strange,
thing.
really.
Yeah, it is. So I started asking myself whether I wanted to do something that was more in prevention. And I didn't know what that was. Then I spoke to someone at a careers fair. And I said, is there such a thing as prevention medicine? And they went, well, there's public health. And I went, well, what's that? I've never heard of public health before. And they said, well, it's population medicine, and you try to find ways to prevent disease. And I was like, well, that sounds really good. I like the sound of that. I think in hindsight, seeing my mum's dad, then my dad's mum, and then my mum's dad, like they all actually passed when they were living with us.
Yeah.
It made me curious about how you could prevent certain things. You can't prevent everything, obviously, but it did make me curious about how you could improve the lives of people living here with these chronic conditions. But it was an excellent course, and that's where I first learned about the role of nutrition in chronic disease. So there's this professor called Elia Ribili, who is like a bit of a legend in public health. He runs the EPIC cohort, which is a huge cohort study of over 500,000 people across Europe, following them for decades. And essentially what EPIC does is it looks at lots of factors, mostly dietary, and how they impact the risk of cancer. And I remember being in this lecture, and he was presenting the data from EPIC about how consumption of red meat and processed meat directly increased the risk of colorectal cancer. And I remember sitting in this lecture, and I was watching him and looking around to see if everyone else was as shocked as I was. Because what he was saying was, we know that this food increases your risk of dying from this cancer. But it was nowhere in like the news or just in public knowledge. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. I was like, I cannot believe that this is well established. It wasn't new science. It's like, another paper, like another study showing this.
Which is going to bring us on to the same thing about alcohol.
Yeah, it is. And so So that's when I first got a taste for, wow, like, okay, there's modifiable risk factors is what you call them, right? These modifiable risk factors are actually quite simple. They're things that we come into contact with every day. But what shocked me is how badly communicated the science was to the public. The problem is that for the public to understand the science, they need to understand, like, how likely is this to be accurate? So even though science could always change and we discover things, I often say to people, we have very clear evidence on what a healthy dietary pattern looks like. Dozens, hundreds of studies with millions of people, right? So it's very good evidence to show that if you have a diet that's high in a variety of plants, that's rich in fiber and healthy fats, mostly plant-based, with a little bit of animal, that is the healthiest dietary pattern. It's as simple as that.
Sounds like our home food.
Good.
Our home menus.
Our home menus. But, and in the future, maybe we'll find out that actually, fermented foods play a really important role and they should be a key part. But it's very unlikely that it's going to do a 180. Like, I would put good money on the fact that it's not going to suddenly be a high carnivore, low fiber, no plant diet is the best way for health. I was shocked that so little of what's available in the research and in the scientific literature actually gets transmitted to the public. Because I think in a lot of cases we're doing a disservice, because knowledge is power. So if people can make informed decisions, then you're giving them a fairer chance of being able to help themselves and keep themselves and their families healthier.
When you did voluntary work back in the day when you was 13 or 14, did you come across any stories or people with alcohol problems, and what was that? Yeah.
So I did volunteered at King's College Hospital on weekends.
That was brave.
Yeah. So we used to take the trolley and go around and just speak to patients, and actually also offer to sell them crap snacks, which wasn't my choice, but that was part of the service. And it was about basically providing an opportunity for human contact for some of the patients who didn't have any visitors, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And I did that because when you apply for medicine, when you want to do medicine at university, you have to show that you've had experience in hospitals and in healthcare settings. And I mean, in the school I went to JAGS, they were very, very pro community service and being an active member of the community. Yeah. So I did that at King's College Hospital. I volunteered at local nursery schools with children that had special needs. So when you're younger, when I was like 15, 14, I was doing this trolley service volunteering. And then when you get to 16, you can actually volunteer to be follow a clinical team around, basically. So this was in Oxford. So I went to Oxford at the hospital, Radcliffe Hospital there, and I did a 3 weeks of shadowing different teams. And they did I'm so grateful to them, because they essentially let me shadow a different team every other day. So I got to do like cardiology for a couple of days. Then they would move me to a new ward and they wouldn't tell me what it was. They were like, guess what it is, which was really fun, because I was like, what can I spot? So, if there was like nil by mouth signs and then lots of different, I was like, is this a surgical ward? Are they waiting to go and have an operation? Or the ward, the hepatic ward was very obvious because everyone was like a shade of yellow or green. Yeah. And actually, the hepatic ward was when I first came across the liver failures, the cirrhosis, and the vast majority of them are alcohol related. And there was this one gentleman I remember who had a really swollen abdomen. So you have this distension of the abdomen when the liver starts to fail. And he was pretty yellow and had like some necrosis in his feet and stuff. So he was not in a good way.
Just for those who don't know, what's necrosis?
So it's like the tissues in his feet had started to die. Cirrhosis is what happens to your liver if it's damaged. So alcohol, what it essentially does is it can kill your liver cells. But the problem with alcohol specifically and cirrhosis is that it kills them, but it kills them so much that they don't even switch on their own self-destruction mechanism, so that you don't have a tissue that, if you have damage elsewhere in the body, cells will self-destruct. But with liver cirrhosis,
I didn't know that.
That self-destruction, so that self-destruction mechanism can't happen because that's been destroyed too. So what you end up with is essentially an actually hard liver, like a rock. Yeah. Rock, it's just...
So your liver, you can go down to 20%, is that correct, of your liver? And it can rejuvenate itself all the way back up?
Yeah. It's an incredibly resilient organ because without a liver, you die.
Yeah.
There's no plan B. So the liver is extremely resilient and it regenerates. You're right. So if you have enough liver left, you have to cut off the dead bit, but it can regrow back to full size.
So alcohol, when you have cirrhosis of liver, you're past the 20%. You're into the last 20%.
No, you can have cirrhosis of the liver can be in just one bit and then it can spread. So you can have a little bit of cirrhosis, or you can have widespread cirrhosis. And obviously, the more you have, the more serious it gets. But it's just such an interesting phenomena where it dies, but the body can't destroy the dead tissue because the enzymatic activity that self-destructs normally can't happen because of the alcohol, the way it damages the tissues and destroys everything. So you have this hard liver, which can't do its job. And so you get this swelling of the abdomen, and the doctors, what they do is they put their hand on the right, so like your liver's here, and if you tap the other side, because there's so much fluid accumulated around the liver that's struggling, and because of protein synthesis, all sorts of reasons, so you have this accumulation of fluid, you get this sort of, you feel the vibration here. Wow. So you tap here and it vibrates through and you feel it. So that was the first. Now, what was interesting about this patient, I remember his face, is that the doctor said, do you drink a lot? Do you have an alcohol problem? And he said no. And the doctor said, how much do you drink a day? On average, what's your day look like? And he said, well, I go to work. He was a labourer. He had like a manual job. And he'd say, and after work, we always go to the pub and I'll have maybe 8 pints every day. And then sometimes when I go home, I'll have a nightcap. And he'd been doing this every day since he was 16. And so now, but he still had a job. He was still functioning. He didn't go out of his way to drink all day. It was just part of his life. And now his liver was failing, basically. So, I remember, so my family are not big drinkers. In Italian culture, we don't drink that much. It's not a thing. We eat a lot, and we cook together and we're loud, but we don't drink a lot. So I have never, in my home life, I'd never met anyone who drank outside of a meal. It just wasn't part of the culture.
Did that shock you that this was a normal part of a British person's life?
I was shocked that he didn't think that was a lot. I can't imagine I was that subtle at that age, but my face was probably like that. And the doctor, I learned a lot from those doctors that let me shadow them because they were never judged and were just listening. So that was one. That was shocking, but actually the most shocking one was when we went. So then they switched wards again, and I was like, "What ward are we in now?" And they didn't tell me what ward it was, and I was looking around this ward, and I was like, "I'm really stumped." There was no same sign above the beds that indicated something. People weren't on ventilators. People weren't yellow. I was like, what ward is this? I couldn't figure it out. So this gentleman is how I found out what ward I was on, because he ran up towards me, up the, in the ward, jumping over beds and swishing through curtains, grabbed me and went, call the police, they're holding me hostage. And for a second, my brain was like, oh my God, he's being held hostage. Because I didn't. And then I went, hold on a minute, but what? And the doctors were watching me. And then the nurses came and took him off me. And he was like, help me, call the police. And I was like, dementia ward. So the dementia ward had this wide variety of people that had very different issues, because dementia covers a huge amount of problems.
Yeah.
And then I saw this young guy. I was like, why is he here? What's he doing in the dementia ward? The doctor said, do you want to come and sit in the consultation with him? And I said, yeah, I'd love to find out what happened. And we sat down and he started talking to us, and he was only 19. So he was very close to my age. And he was telling the story. He had a cut on his head, and the doctor said, how did you get the cut on your head? And he said, well, I was walking my dog with my girlfriend and I tripped. And the doctor was like, okay. And I was still like, why is this guy here? So he made sense. He recalled the day before. He told us about his family, about his girlfriend. And so I was stumped. I said, why is he here? So after the consultation had finished, and he said, well, he doesn't have a girlfriend. He doesn't have a dog. He's been here for 3 months. And I was like, wow. What? He said, yes. So what this young man had is a result of drinking. He'd been a heavy drinker from the age of 12 after a traumatic childhood. And he had what's called Korsakoff syndrome. So his brain had completely lost the ability of laying down new memories. So every day he confabulated, medical term for lying.
Yeah.
So he created reality because he can't remember what happened yesterday.
Oh, that's terrible.
And he was 19. And you can't reverse that, right? So
Hang on,
yeah,
you
I've
can't
actually got
reverse that at all.
No, that's like really serious. That's
So
brain
that's him.
damage. Yes.
Oh man, that's so bad.
When you think about what is alcohol, right? In terms, if you think of it like a drug, it's a neurotoxin. It kills neuronal cells. Like it's a neurotoxin. It kills them.
When I used to smoke years and years ago, and you see the packet of lungs or teeth, I just turn it over and think it's not me. And even though you're telling me that, for some reason, it's like maybe it's too impactful that I can't take it in to know that it's killing brain cells.
Yeah, it's hard because socially it's acceptable. So when you start really thinking about this, right? So it's a neurotoxin. It's not just that. It's a class 1 carcinogen. There are 4 things in our lives that are considered class 1 carcinogens. The ones that we know are smoking, red and processed meat, and alcohol. And the 4th is a bit more random, but betel nut and Chinese saltfish, which are foods that are understood to be class 1 carcinogens, but they're not easily accessible here. There's lots of other exposures like asbestos and environmental pollutants and radiation that are on this massive map. But when you look at the map of things we ingest or inhale, like as in purposefully, like smoking, it's not a lot. Not a lot of things are class 1 carcinogens.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
Because it's so celebrated and it's such, let's have a drink. And in the conversation, in Britain anyway, I know it's different in other cultures, but...
No, it literally is. So any amount of alcohol drunk directly increases your risk of mouth cancer, esophageal cancer, pharynx and larynx, so the parts of your throat, and breast cancer. Any amount. Then like you need to drink a couple of units if to see increased risk in stomach cancer, liver cancer, and colorectal cancer.
Wow.
So it has this, and so it's a neurotoxin, it's a carcinogen, and it's a teratogen, which is a word used for things that change embryonic development in pregnancy. So if you drink when you're pregnant, especially in the first few weeks, alcohol impacts the development of the baby, of the embryo. We know this about alcohol, ethanol, and acetaldehyde, which is like a breakdown product of ethanol when your liver breaks it down, is like equally, it's toxic. It's all a toxic soup, basically, right? And so I think for me, seeing the patients and seeing the direct harm was the first time I was ever exposed to just how dangerous alcohol can be. But, right, even though that I saw this firsthand, and I was relatively young when this happened, it's still culturally so acceptable that I still went off to uni and went to Freshers Week and bought £5 pitchers of vodka Red Bull at the student nights, because we're still, even at biomedical degree class, we weren't taught, actually, you really shouldn't drink if you want to reduce your risk of stuff.
But that's what I'm saying about the analogy of the cigarettes. It's something about, because it's so socially accepted. Yeah. I mean, especially in my family, and it's been there all the time. Yeah. Generationally. Yeah. It's hard to understand, because also you see, my grandfather, my dad's dad who died, when he died, he'd been drinking all his life, a lot, like a lot, and still lived until he was in his 70s. Yeah,
and that's the other important thing to note, is that whenever I talk about risk factors and we have these conversations, right? So when we think about chronic disease, going back to why this is important, is when we think about chronic disease, about 80% of premature deaths from the leading causes of chronic disease are preventable. That's a big number that you could prevent, right? And the major risk factors that you need to engage with to reduce your risk are not smoking, not drinking alcohol, doing some type of movement, so physical exercise. It doesn't have to be like the gym, but move, and your diet. So if people who want to live longer, who want to optimize their health, those are all free things, right? Arguably, of course, food price has gone up, but eating a healthy, sustainable diet is actually not that expensive.
No, but if you drop out the alcohol, it'd be a lot cheaper anyway.
Yeah, and the smoking, right?
Yeah.
So those 4 things are the way to, everyone's talking about like optimization and biohacking, and
Just
that's a
take them
1%.
out.
That's a 1% change you're making.
Yeah.
If you want to really increase your chances of living longer and not having a chronic disease, those are the 4 things to focus on. And then I would say like the 5th that it doesn't have as much data on it, but we know is super important, is getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
So it's actually not complicated, but it's hard because the way that our society is set up is 24/7 culture. So sleep isn't actually protected, right?
It's not very trendy.
It's not very, well, yeah. Then alcohol is marketed and it's 2 for 1 in the supermarkets or like discounted, and it's part of like social culture. And smoking now, thankfully, has become less socially acceptable, and we've seen that it works. So the thing that you just mentioned about putting the like, you know, really awful images on the packets of cigarettes and it says smoking causes cancer, smoking kills people, has worked. Less people smoke.
But I do think on top of that though, that if you went to somewhere to buy cigarettes, they're usually covered over now.
Now they are,
You
yeah.
have to you can't smoke in the building. So
That's all part of policy.
The awkwardness of it
Yeah,
has helped not to smoke, because it's a pain in the ass to smoke.
for sure. But that is all policy intervention. That's not individual people having better control and having better. A lot of like smoking used to be this thing where I was like, well, if you don't want to smoke, just don't smoke. It's like that is such a tobacco industry tactic because if you make a product that's addictive and you market it and you make it socially acceptable and you make it available, individual agency is not the strongest factor. It's the same that we're seeing with like junk processed foods. Oh, well, just don't eat them. If they're the cheapest thing that you find in every single corner shop and you're marketing them and advertising them on social media, that's what people are going to buy.
I drove to get petrol the other day, and I've never really noticed it because I just don't look at that shelf. And literally behind the guy, it was like strong alcohol.
Yeah.
Everything was on sale. Like you said, 2 for 1 or cheap things or bargain stuff.
Yeah.
And the temptation for someone who's drinking or mentally would be like, oh, I might as well get it here because it's cheaper or it's okay to do that. That is such
It's a huge
sales
factor.
tactic.
Yeah.
Do you think that, what do you think would work for policy change in the UK?
Yeah. So, I mean, the tobacco policies are a really good blueprint. So I think one of the reasons we're having this conversation today is because the World Cancer Research Fund is trying to appeal to get an alcohol policy in place. Every year, the World Cancer Research Fund will do this prevention week. This year, they're focusing on alcohol and encouraging people to sign a petition to encourage the government to have an alcohol policy in place that protects public health. Because at the moment, we don't have alcohol policies that protect public health.
Yeah.
There's like some restrictions on where you can advertise alcohol, and the back of the cans or the bottles will have like a small diagram with a pregnant woman that says don't drink if you're pregnant, like right at the back. But even that is like, you know, there's still debate about whether pregnant women should drink or not.
Which is crazy.
Which is, the science is obvious, but there's still this like, well, you know, individual agency, and like if a woman wants to, it's her body, her choice. It's like informed choice is not the same thing. If we look to tobacco industry and how policy came into place to help reduce smoking, and it has done so successfully, right? It's worked. We should have warning labels on alcohol. We really should. Because what I find super interesting, I guess is the word, is that less than half of adults in the UK and Europe even know that alcohol is a carcinogen. So more than half of the population don't even realize that it's a carcinogen. So there's a problem there, right?
Yeah.
Now, I did a podcast a while ago where I mentioned that alcohol consumption increases the risk of breast cancer every unit you drink. So like there's no safe amount. And people were outraged by this. And I looked this up, and less than 15% of people know that alcohol causes breast cancer. So the awareness is super low. And I guess this is why we're doing this awareness week, because people just don't even realize that alcohol is a carcinogen.
Is that because it's blocked by the alcohol industry, or is that because it's just not a cool thing to put in a magazine, or why would that be so hidden?
So I think it's because alcohol is part of our. So here's how I think about it. My understanding from working with people is that when it comes to things like cancer or children's health or like really fundamental issues, right? The public tends to think that the government is protecting them. They tend to think.
Don't know whether they still think that.
No, they do. They
really?
do. There was a BBC panorama that came out recently about children's food and the fact that these pouches were super high in sugar and low in nutrients and were essentially just unnecessary for children. People were overwhelmingly outraged that they were allowed to be sold. Like, why are they allowed to be sold if they're bad for kids?
Yeah.
Right? It's a fair question because I think as a society, we expect there to be some public health protection. Some.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the time people are like, well, if alcohol was so bad for us, they would have told us by now. Or like, we would know by now.
That's a very true sentence,
Right.
actually, yeah.
That's the problem.
Fair.
So think about the fact that it's hardly really taught in school, let alone like normal schools, even in a medical
Hence why
school.
we're doing those school talks with Stride to educate the kids.
Well, exactly, because it's so important. Because
Yeah.
I remember having the talk when I was at university about smoking. Smoking causes cancer. And even then, though, I remember one of my professors wasn't convinced that secondhand smoke could do harm. And so I remember him saying, we're still not entirely sure about whether passive smoking is bad. And of course it is now. And in hindsight, the tobacco industry funded a lot of studies to try and prove that passive smoking wasn't that bad. If we could get to a point where the government decided, actually, we do really need to make more of a point about this because it's costing lives, right? So that we know
It's something like 350 billion a year, financially.
It's a huge cost to the country, to the NHS. And then I was looking at this up the other day, preparing for this. So there's worldwide more than 700,000 new cancer cases are attributable to alcohol alone.
Wow.
So, these are huge numbers. And then alcohol, even if it's not the single factor, it builds on top of other factors. So if you have a genetic predisposition, a poor diet, maybe you've smoked in the past and you drink, it's all cumulative effect. So it's one of those things there where if the government really wanted to make a difference here and reduce these numbers, then they could actually at least put a warning sign on the package, ban advertising, make sure that selling alcohol to a teen, like to someone under 18, I would argue that actually the age should be brought up, if I'm honest. So when the brain is developing in late teenagehood, early 20s, it's super susceptible to the damage of alcohol as a neurotoxin. And we also know that the more years you drink, the higher your risk. So if we could start people drinking later, you're reducing the risk.
Does it affect at different ages if you start drinking older or if you start drinking younger?
So the younger you start, the worse the effect. I would argue that actually making alcohol later, like alcohol age later, would be good. And then really punish people who sell alcohol to younger kids. Like make the fines horrendous or shut venues down that do it, because it's really, really detrimental. Without even going into the risk of aggression, that is aside from that, the acute risk of binge drinking is really high. So there are policies, there are things that government could do. Do you know what I found out today that I was shocked with? That now cancer, so heart disease has historically been the leading risk factor, the leading cause of death in Europe. And now cancer and heart disease are basically together. They're basically the same. So cancer is actually a leading cause of death. Wow. It's not just that there's a lot of cancer cases luckily now survive, but it's actually a leading cause of death. So we have a risk factor here that we know is causing cancer, and we know people don't know that. So that means that they are consuming alcohol as uninformed people. It's not an informed choice.
What I find really weird, though, as well, is that in Parliament, there's always alcohol and they can drink and make decisions on the country. So I wonder if, because they themselves are consuming it whilst they're making decisions, that is why they wouldn't do that.
Oh, there's so much bias, isn't there? Because if you're doing something and you think you're all right. You don't really want to face up to the fact that maybe it's not that good.
No.
There's lobbying. I mean, you have to point that out, that they have a lot of money.
I really think that education, like what we're doing in schools and podcasts, is a way to go, because a lot more people are jumping on the podcasting for direct, free education and stuff like this. How does it affect your microbiome?
Yeah. So the key things that alcohol does is it causes inflammation in the tissues it touches. So like, is this the toxin which directly damages the tissue? So that's why like mouth cancer also goes up, because it just damages the tissues in your mouth, like the actual epithelium. And then as it goes down the tract, the liver, bless the liver, has to deal with breaking it down and trying to get rid of the toxins and the breaking down products. And then as you go down the gut, that's why stomach cancer increases risk, colorectal cancer as well. So when it gets to the colon, it disrupts the gut microbiome and it inflames the wall, essentially, like the protective layer of the gut. So if you think about, our gut lining is actually only one cell thick.
Yeah.
And then it's got a really thick mucin layer, which is like the snot that protects your gut lining, right? And then just past that one cell thick barrier, there's most of our immune system surrounding the gut, waiting for information to respond to any pathogens we might have eaten or any proteins that are unusual. So a lot of the information our immune system gets is from the gut. Because, of course, we swallow things, we breathe things and swallow them, we eat them. So really good for information. When you drink alcohol, it sort of causes this inflammation all the way down as it goes down the esophagus, the stomach, and then into the gut, the liver, and then into gut. And essentially, it disrupts the microbiome. So the good, happy microbes, healthy microbes that support the mucin layer production, that keep the immune system in balance and that send helpful messages to the immune system. They don't like alcohol. It doesn't help them, ethanol or acetaldehyde, so both. And it also actually disrupts the barrier. Mm-hmm. So what can result from that, and you see this a lot in people who have sort of cirrhosis of the liver and who have been heavy drinkers for a long time, they have what's called leaky gut. So the gut, essentially, the barrier can't keep in the waste products that come from inside the gut, and they start to leak into the body and into the immune system.
Wow.
So you have this leaky gut situation, which then the body tries to clear, and guess which organ needs to try and clear this toxin? The toxins is the liver. And the liver's already overworked at this point. So the inflammation, the low-level inflammation, we know that inflammation is a key driver of cancer. And then again, the liver's suffering with this leaky gut as well. So the gut is not happy with alcohol consumption. Now there's like probiotics coming to the market that promise to protect the gut when you drink. But honestly, some of the things that I always say when I get asked by journalists. That sounds like putting a tiny
little airbag in a big car.
Yeah, I mean, journalists say, like, what can people do? And I say, well, they can just drink less. Yeah. That's the best thing you can do. And then the other thing that seems to be like protective is to, if you're going to drink with a meal. When you look at alcohol as a drug, like as a pharmaceutical drug,
yeah.
So they've calculated what the safe amount would be to consume before these neurotoxic, genotoxic effects, right? And it's 2 units a year.
Wow.
So
a year.
Because our bodies are really good at dealing with toxins.
Yeah.
Like we have, if we're lucky, if we're metabolically healthy as well, our bodies are really amazing at doing this. But we're talking about a substance that's genuinely harmful. And when you look at it, if you took a step back and you were to regulate this as a drug, 2 units a year.
When we first went for a meal in New York together, and I wasn't drinking, I ordered you a espresso martini.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was like, "Do you want some? Do you want some?" What did you think that I wasn't drinking?
I don't have any stigma attached to not drinking. For me, that's not. So for me, it's like, okay, you don't drink. It made me think, oh, actually, maybe I shouldn't have this espresso martini then. Because it had become, living in New York had made sort of drinking became this social thing. Yeah. So it was like, luckily, I didn't drink every day. But for a date or meeting someone new, it became like a normal thing.
Yeah.
And so you telling me that you didn't drink, I was like, oh, that's quite nice actually, because then I don't have to drink either.
Which is such an amazing
so
reaction.
weird.
Because a lot of people would be like, oh, you're quite boring. I've heard this so many times. Oh, that's a shame. But
I'm so grateful that you don't drink, because thanks to the fact that you don't drink, I don't drink. Like we at home, like it doesn't occur to me to drink.
Never.
Why? Like, so I'm so glad that I married someone who doesn't drink. Our girls are growing up with a household where the parents don't drink. Like, we occasionally will have some champagne if it's a birthday.
When you say we, it's not me.
No, not you. That would be not good. But say, or like mum, or, you know, I love to have a small glass of red wine with a meal at a restaurant, but I often don't even finish it.
No, it's really rare. I do actually look at you, and I do actually think, why are you not drinking that? Because I know for me, back in the day, it's just not, I mean, even the amount you pour wouldn't be worth drinking, to be honest.
But for me, it's the flavors, and it's like with the meal. And then I don't like how alcohol makes me feel. So like, I don't like feeling tipsy. I don't enjoy that. It's not something that I don't want it. And also now that, you know, the next day, like it affects my sleep, my Oura ring tells me off. And if I have one glass of wine, I feel it the next day. So like, why would I? It brings nothing.
But it's refreshing, because it's a lot of people that I work with and stuff that have a complete opposite view of that. Did you not even think at our wedding? Nothing. That's amazing.
Because I don't think you need the alcohol to mark an event. I'm grateful to my family for the fact that I grew up not thinking alcohol was a central part of our social glue, right? Because it wasn't. Food, yes. and then also for myself, it's like, I also see what happens. You know, I have friends who both of the couple have a difficult relationship with alcohol, and it's devastating.
Yeah, it's true.
It's awful, right? Yeah. And I can't imagine, like, when I was pregnant, or when something happened with the girls, if they were unwell, both of us are on the ball. Like, I can't imagine if I'd gone into labor, which with Bella was earlier than expected, right? Yeah. Imagine if you'd been drunk and you couldn't drive me to the hospital.
Do you know, I thought about that, because there was once when I was younger, my mum was taken to hospital, and my dad phoned me and said, look, you better come down. And I was absolutely hammered. And I remember getting to the hospital, going in, and I had this real sense of like shame, and also like I was a bit of a drama queen with the doctor, but you know, that really struck me, that what would happen, especially even married, what would happen if a kid was ill? You know, and this is not like pushing anyone down, because I've had friends who've had issues, but for me, I'm so grateful that at a drop of a dime in the middle of the night, if one of the kids is unwell, that we can be up, and it's a real asset.
But that's a real driver for me as well. That's made me like move further and further away from wanting to drink. Because I had a similar thing so when my dad was sick, my parents had a wedding, like a vow renewal, and I had been out the night before, and I drank more than I would normally, and I was hungover at the church for the vow renewal. And this is obviously like a long time ago, but I remember thinking, God, this is just not who I want to be.
Lucky me. What a great match.
Well, yeah, so it worked for us. But I think, one thing I wanted to say, people who smoke 20 cigarettes a day, guess how many years of life they lose?
I think I've heard this, maybe it was 7, I think.
8 years, right?
8 years.
So if you smoke 20 cigarettes a day for your adult life, you lose 8 years.
Yeah.
How many years do you think you lose if you drink a bottle of wine a day? Now,
which is a lot of people drink a bottle of wine a day. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
I would say it's got to be more than 8, so 10.
So it's you lose 7 years.
Right.
But I was shocked by that, because 20 cigarettes a day is quite a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
and a bottle a day. If you drink 2, now this is a big point with alcohol, and I think it's important for anyone listening. Alcohol and risk have a J curve. So the more you drink, the more the risk more than doubles. So it's like, it's not a linear relationship.
It's a compound effect.
It's this real J curve. So when you drink 2 bottles of wine a day, you lose 21 years. That's a 3-fold increase
Wow.
for just twice the amount, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So really urging those who drink more,
Yeah.
cut down, because you will drastically reduce your life lost.
God, I know people who drink 2 bottles of wine a day
Easily. Yeah. I've
like
worked
one
with
with
people
lunch
who
and
do.
one with dinner.
Yeah. I've worked with people who easily drink a bottle
Wow,
a day.
21 years.
21 years of life. So I think it's important to just frame it like, what can people do about this, right? There's a petition, which we'll put in the show notes, that is aimed at helping policy come in so that there can be awareness, so people can make informed choices. We also, like, the last time that the guidelines were reviewed was 10 years ago now, 2016, I think it was. So, and those guidelines did reduce the upper limit, so 14 units a week for men and women. But as we've discussed today, like, people who drink 14 units a week already see a reduction in hippocampal volume. It's already affecting your brain. It's already increasing your risk of those cancers that I've mentioned, right? So reviewing how the risk is communicated. And if you are listening to this and you think, actually, do you know what? I drink most days. Could I reduce that? Could I drink a bit less? It's worth thinking about the effects it's having on the different parts of your body and really making the effort to find a way that you can reduce your alcohol intake. Make it, maybe you can be the first person to change your family's culture and not make drinking a central part of celebration, not make drinking the thing that you do to unwind. What else can you do at the end of the day? Marketing tactics by the alcohol industry are very clever. There was like this big uptick in all these cards and little logos. Wine o'clock for mum. Do you remember this? We pointed this out in shops. We were like, what is this?
Yeah.
Right? Suddenly all these like funny memes about like, is it wine o'clock yet for mums?
Yeah.
It became like normal.
And people have taken that on as a joke. Like,
as a
hey,
joke.
is it 1 o'clock?
But it's not funny,
Yeah.
right? And then when we think about how can we help change the narrative, and this is not to say that you can never drink again. The body is clever. It is resilient. And it will, if you drink a glass of champagne on your birthday, if you have a glass of red wine once a month with a meal, it's going to be a drop in the ocean of the things your body has to deal with every day. But it's this regular pattern drinking where it becomes a weekly thing. You drink every week. Then if you drink every day, that needs to, people, I hopefully can just take away that isn't part of a healthy life. That's not supporting your health.
Also, habitually, it would be more and more as time goes on because you get resilient to it as well, right?
Well, you get resilient to the effects on your mood and stuff, right? So you need, if you're drinking to get the pleasure of drinking, so if you're looking for the psychoactive component of it, then you need more and more to reach that state.
I'm a Formula One fan, as you know.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, used to be cigarettes advertising, then it was alcohol. Then
it was Red Bull, wasn't it? There was energy drinks.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But then it disappeared. But then I went to Formula E and it was 0.0 Heineken. And I'm used to seeing from the past advertising for alcohol. And obviously it's banned. So to see it was normal. And then I realised, advertising's back, but it's 0.0.
Yeah.
Do you think that's kind of a sneaky backdoor of getting alcohol back into the market?
Yeah. It's like marketing playbook 101. So the tobacco industry was the first to really put that playbook into place. And it's been repeated again with alcohol, and it's being repeated again with unhealthy foods as well. So you see that like big fast food chains sponsor football events, sporting events, right? Or the famous video of Ronaldo who moved the Coca-Cola bottle out of sight. Yeah. But so with alcohol, they have this loophole right now where big recognizable alcohol companies can suddenly sponsor Formula One or Formula E because it's a no alcohol product, but the same brand. So it's like still giving those brands that sell alcoholic products a halo, like a brand halo of being cool again. Completely, like it's a complete tactic, and it's very clever, but it's so obvious when you look at it. If I take a step back, so you would have, the fact that you were like, oh, that's weird, like it's an alcohol brand, but it's subliminally the alcohol brand is getting the kudos
the name. Exactly.
for being associated with a cool sport and, with being healthy, essentially. So you're seeing a lot of that.
I personally do think that it's a good thing that they are not the advertising, if that's the way it will work
Yeah.
mentally, but that there are 0 alcohol things, because it gives people an option that if they feel like they're peer pressured or personally feel like, oh my God, I can't walk into a room and look different from my friends at that point, if they're stopping to drink, then I think it's a good alternative in the beginning if someone's stopping drinking, or if you have a business lunch or like a crazy business week, that you can opt out to have lower alcohol consumption.
I completely agree with you. But you know what's really interesting is that the alcohol industry has had to respond to demand for low alcohol products. So they have responded to demand. That it's a huge growing category, because actually younger people are drinking less alcohol.
So I learned that the younger people are drinking less because they've seen the damage it does. But for the ones who are drinking a lot more.
Yeah, so there's still, there's more of a divide.
Yeah.
But that demand from the public to have more alcohol-free options has led to more production of good alcohol-free alternatives, which is really good. However, like if you are a company that produces unhealthy products, you shouldn't be allowed to market yourself full stop, right? Yeah. You shouldn't be allowed to advertise if the majority of a portfolio is killing people. That's like the best way to look at that. So if most of what you do is a negative impact on humanity, you shouldn't be allowed to have an advertising space in a really cool event. That's the ideal situation. So interestingly, it'll be interesting to see, like Ireland is bringing out some new warning labels for alcohol.
Oh, okay.
Like I think 2026. So it'd be interesting to see if once Ireland takes that step forward, whether the rest.
The reality is,
will follow.
People aren't stupid, right? Generally, and I think if you have an informed decision, you can say, okay, I know. It's like I know I'm going to get a hangover tomorrow, but for this celebration or whatever it is, I'm prepared to take a little bit on the chin at one point, and also. Really, if you understand what you've just explained, which I think is crazy about the cancer, if you are really informed about it, then you have a choice to say, you know what, I'm not gonna drink that. Ideally,
don't drink to the point that you have a hangover the next day. If you are going to have a drink, go into it with that knowledge. Okay, I know this is not good for me, but I fancy it right now, and I'm going to have a glass. Now, if you're someone who says that and can't do it, because every time one glass turns into a bottle, then that's a red flag.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's also having the level of understanding of yourself and whether you actually have that capacity. Because we know that alcohol dependence is a problem, it's a real issue. So you have to have a level of self-awareness. But to your point, I think if people are informed, they can make an informed choice. If they're not informed, then it's not an informed choice. It's just they're going into it blind. Yeah. And a lot of people will be listening to this and they'll say, well, what about that 115-year-old woman who said that she drinks every day and that's what's kept her alive for a long time? When we talk about risk factors, they are risk factors. They increase or decrease your relative risk of getting a disease, right? It is not an absolute factor. So people can smoke until they're 98 and never get lung cancer. Some people can live a really healthy lifestyle and have a great diet and never drink or smoke and get cancer. It's not about, you don't know what your baseline risk is. You don't know what exposures have happened. It's genetic. There's so many things that play a part.
The dice.
But yeah, you don't know, right? Yeah. But if we can understand which risk factors we have the power to modify with our choices, that gives us as much agency as possible to give us the best deck of cards.
We was in Barbados.
Yes.
I was about 12 years sober, 10 years sober, I think.
I can't remember. But
and
about that.
I love a floater coffee, which is like an Irish coffee with no alcohol.
It's like coffee and cream.
Yeah. So I ordered one, didn't I, when we was in a restaurant?
Yeah.
And we was talking so much and having fun, I let it go. Then I downed it, the whole thing, and realised that it was probably like 80% rum.
There's a lot of rum in there.
I'm not quite sure what happened because I know I woke up later because I had alcohol in my system for a long time. What did you see change in my personality?
Oh my gosh, it was crazy. It was such a switch up. Well, first you panicked a little bit when you realised. And I said, let's just get you home. Let's go back to the house. Don't worry about it. And we'll loads of water and have a nap, basically. But it was interesting. You were hyperactive is the best way I can describe it. But it was
that sounds like
very wired. You
Really?
were really quite wired, yeah. And I just remember that. I just
Doing
remember,
it loud or anything?
what I really remember is the moment of panic in your eyes when you realised.
Right.
And I just remember thinking the most important thing right now is just to make sure that you don't get sad about it or like don't get too upset.
Yeah.
Let's just get you back. So the hyperactivity was better than the opposite, than you like going into a pit of despair
But
about
I
it.
feel that showed that I drink differently, because when I drink alcohol, instead of being more relaxed and calm, I go
Oh
up.
gosh, yeah, you were not relaxed
Yeah,
or
I
calm.
react differently, yeah.
But
You did say to me the next day, I know why you don't drink now.
Yeah, I'm glad. Very good. And that wasn't even like that. That was nothing
like one
compared.
bit.
But yeah, it was interesting to see that. I think you're lucky. You're so lucky that you found sobriety early in your life, relatively early. So you have unknowingly reduced a massive risk factor that could have really impacted your health really negatively had you not found.
I don't believe I'd be here now at my
Yeah.
age.
Yeah.
Dr. Federica Amati, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This is Powerful is brought to you by Stride Foundation. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please head over to www.stridefoundation.com, where you can find links to resources that may help. You can also donate. Please make a donation. It will help us bring to you more episodes. Please rate, follow, and subscribe to the show. Why? This will help the algorithm make us more visible to others who need help. And share this podcast with your family, friends. Head over to social media at Paul Scolfort and at _is_powerful. You'll get to see what's coming up, and you can get in touch with us because I love hearing about you. Thank you also to my beautiful wife, Dr. Federica Amati, the best producer, Shannon Delwich, to Ebba Long, who does all the hard work in the background. Thank you also to Rian Musa and the rest of the team. Hi everybody, I'd really love to hear your views so that we can produce a podcast with the content that matters to you. It doesn't matter if you just joined us or if you've been listening from the start. We would love you to fill in the short listener feedback form, which you can find in the show notes. And let me know your thoughts on our podcast. It would really mean a lot. Thanks, guys.